Are you doing your crunches but still dealing with back pain and even a weak core? Well, if you're over 50, these 3 core training mistakes might be holding you back. In this video, I'm going to show you some smart, simple solutions that will improve your core strength and also help to protect your joints. Welcome to the Joint Longevity Lab by Fitness Integrated Science. I'm Eirk, and in this video, I'm going to go over 3 core training mistakes that oftentimes hold people back in the results they're trying to get. Now, when we think of core training, what do we think of? We think of somebody with ripped six-pack that has a real skinny waist, and we all want this. We love the way a strong core may look in the mirror, but in reality, the core is much, much deeper than that. Now, from my first mistake that people make, we have this big focus on crunches. Crunches are the quintessential core exercise. We're lying on our back and we're performing crunches under the force of gravity. Don't get me wrong, I love crunches. I do think that it's very important that we work to strengthen the muscles that flex the spine, even though there's a lot of controversy around that. But there are inherent issues. For instance, a lot of people are too weak to do that and they hold their head and they're yanking on their neck. Some people have spinal issues and they're told that they can't flex their spine because of the intervertebral pressure on the disc. That being said, one of the biggest things that our core does during the day is it stabilizes us. And these muscles that flex the spine also work to stabilize the spine. So for instance, let's say that I was going to bend over and pick up something heavy on one side of my body. This object is pulling me into lateral flexion or side bend. So the muscles over here have to keep me upright to prevent me from getting injured. That is real core training. By the same token, if I have this object across from me and I not only bend forward, but I actually come down and rotate, I have to move from position into rotation, come out of rotation, and return that back into neutral. So the core muscles actually transfer forces from the inside of the core out to our limbs and absorb forces from our limbs back into our core. That's super, super, super important. So we might want to think of our core training as actually working on these stabilization exercises. One of my most favorite of these is the bird dog. Now, if you have a knee replacement or a knee injury, I would definitely recommend putting your hands in a chair and standing. Otherwise, you would just come on down to the floor and all fours. Now, this is called neutral spine because gravity is directly on top of me and I'm not trying to do anything but just hold my spine steady. Then I can practice raising one hand off the floor, which automatically puts more load on this side, maybe even contralaterally lifting up the opposite knee. That's going to put my spine into a rotation, but I'm not going to rotate. That's called spinal stabilization. And as I got stronger, I may be able to increase my lever length and then eventually even working on switching back from side to side, seeing that my spinal muscles could actually transfer right into that stabilization role on demand. From here, I could even change planes of motion. So let's say that I come to here, which is that flexion extension component. What if I move my limbs out to the side? Now my lateral stabilizers in my spine have to work really hard not to fall out of this position. This is a great exercise for people not only with spinal issues, but also just to prepare us for anything that life has to come our way. Now, all of these positions bring up a really good point. And I'm going to still say this is about not just focusing on the abdominal muscles. Your six-pack are really good at flexing, and I think this is a wonderful exercise working on flexing the spine. But a really big thing that we want to train is rotation. So rotation might look like from a supine position, taking one hand behind the head, which is going to asymmetrically load the spine. Then when I come up, I'm actually moving in a spiraling or a rotational motion. This is a very important thing to train. By the same token, if I did the same thing from a prone position, let's say I was coming into extension. This is going to train my muscles in my back, which are also a really big part of the core that people oftentimes neglect. Bending backwards. I want to incorporate some of those rotational exercises as I move into my backward bend. We also want to train side bending muscles. So side bending muscles that laterally flex the spine are going to come into play a lot with picking up an object on one side, maybe even some of these side planking exercises. And they also show up when we actually perform motion where we're shortening over an object. So as for instance, I'm starting over the sponge ball and then I shift ribs to hips to strengthen my lateral flexors. And we want to make sure that we're training the left and right side of our body so that we can prepare for what's going to happen to us in life, whether we're standing on one leg, picking up an object, or just performing a task that we have to do something on one side of the body a lot more than we do the other. So again, crunches are wonderful, but we want to think about the spine and the core as being a 360-degree unit. Now, for my second mistake that people make, we focus on core training as being all about the abs, the obliques, even the lower back, but we don't think that the hips as well as the glutes are a part of that. So if I take a look again at spinal flexion, and I've seen programs before where they've taught their participants that the focus is to get the hip flexor muscles out of spinal flexion. This is a really common one with putting a ball behind your back. Here's the thing. The hip flexor muscles, one of the major one being the psoas major, not only crosses the femur, which performs hip flexion exercise, but it attaches onto the spine. So it's almost impossible to detach the hip muscles from the trunk muscles. So we have to specifically train these muscles if we're going to have a strong core. So if I want to train my hip flexor muscles from a supine position, then that means I'm working against gravity down here and then maybe pushing against my leg when you're coming up here. And things like Pilates, they try to do things like for the scissoring exercise, but I want to make sure that I'm blocking it as I come in so that I can really train those hip flexor muscles. I can also train them in such exercises as squatting, lunging, leg pressing, where I'm specifically targeting hip flexor muscles. Now we also have hip extensor muscles, the glutes. Your glutes are going to support your pelvis and your lower back. So if I go back into this prone position and I'm trying to perform an extension exercise, the gluteal muscles attach right up at the iliac crest at the top. So when I'm doing this, telling someone to relax their glutes might be okay, but we can't entirely relax them because they are a huge part of our lumbar spine or thoracolumbar fascia. So performing this motion as well as this motion is very challenging. One of my favorite exercises to train for the glutes is the glute bridge. So for instance, if I'm coming down onto my back with a flexed knee and coming back up into my extension exercise, you're going to feel that I have a combination of glutes, and I'm going to say even hamstrings, as well as the low back and muscles in between the shoulder. Literally everything that potentially is resisting gravity is a component of this exercise. So training the gluteal muscles might look like a hip thrust or a hip bridge, maybe even adding some load to this area so that I can really work on engaging those gluteal muscles, but also certain things like hip hinging, deadlifts, squats and lunges that were actually set up to target the glutes. That is going to improve core strength. And laterally, lastly, if we think about the lateral part of the hips and what the hip abduction exercises do, if I'm going back into this exercise where I'm in side bending, which we can all say that this is a huge part of our core strength, anytime that I'm bending sideways from here, I could also be moving into hip abduction from here. So exercises that, again, show up in programs like Pilates and yoga, there's a very large intelligence about that. When I'm on the floor and I'm doing these abduction exercises or clamshell exercises, I'm using my spinal muscles to stabilize the pelvis and the trunk so that I can move the hip. Working on both of those, even standing up and doing sideways lateral motions with thigh bands or even standing on one leg, is going to be crucial for training the core. Now, for my last exercise, this is super important, especially for those of us that are over 50 And this is the deep core, the pelvic floor, the transverse abdominis, the deep paraspinal muscles such as the multifidus, as well as the diaphragm. This makes up the box that supports the outer core that we see in the mirror. If you're somebody that maybe at nighttime you have to go to the bathroom a lot, or when you laugh or strain, you might maybe have a little incontinence there. We always are embarrassed to talk about it, but it happens. If you notice that when you go to the restroom, you can't fully empty your bladder. Maybe you're dealing with a painful lower back, painful intercourse, painful trying to sit for long periods of time. All of this can be indicative of a weak core. So some of these exercises that we want to work on, let's just say that I was here and I placed this ball between the legs. On the inhalation breath, where the rib cage expands, this is where the diaphragm will drop and stretch down, and this is where the pelvic floor tends to relax a little bit. When we exhale, part of being able to push that breath out is an actual lifting of the diaphragm, or the fibers shorten, and then the pelvic floor engages and lifts up, and that helps to push the breath out. Now, doing something like this, which is going to train our hip adductor muscles, there's those hips again, I can practice on the inhalation breath, moving into that anterior tilt, which is where my pelvis is coming down, and I'm feeling my lower back and hip flexors. Then on the exhalation breath, pressing that lower back into the floor, maybe a gentle tightening of the glutes, pressing into the ball, and then engaging that pelvic floor. The idea of releasing and relaxing those core muscles on the inhale, and then lightly engaging that pelvic floor on the exhale is also really important. Many times people's pelvic floors are too tight and they don't really have the ability to relax, and that's one of the reasons why people can't fully urinate on them when they're going to the restroom. So quick flicking back and forth, going from engaging the pelvic floor to releasing the pelvic floor is important. And also just placing your hands on your belly and noticing when you inhale, maybe you're putting one hand here and one hand here. When you inhale, you feel that expansion of the ribs. But when you exhale, you feel that tightening of the belly as you engage the pelvic floor subtly, almost like you're trying to hold a blueberry at the base of your spine. Again, inhaling breath, breathing, and then using your abdominal muscles to exhale. Now imagine if we could incorporate those techniques when we're lifting heavy objects, even when we're working on our core, that it's not always about engaging our abdominals and engaging our obliques, but also focusing on the muscles that support the organs in the pelvic floor, which, yes, as we age, they tend to diminish in strength. Now, just to summarize, there are 3 things that we want to focus on in our core training. Number 1, not just focusing on abs and crunches, but working on core stabilization and training the core from a 360-degree platform. Number 2, making sure that we are training our hips and our glutes and not just focusing on abs. And number 3, making sure that we are working our deep core, our pelvic floor and transverse abdominis, diaphragmatic breathing, and not just focusing on the outer core. Now, if you want to train smarter and learn a lot more in-depth exercises around these 3 principles, I invite you to try a free trial at Fitness Integrated Science TV, where I will supply you with hundreds of videos and programs to help support your core strength, which is a major theme of my platform. If you like this video, make sure to give me a thumbs up and share it with anyone that you know that I can help. And lastly, if you haven't subscribed, make sure to do that so you never have to miss another video or short that comes through. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you on the next video.